My name is Major Paul Ferris from San Antonio, Texas, and I'm a student over at the Air Command and Staff College right now.
Hello, fellow pilots. I'm John King.
And I'm Martha King.
John and Martha King, if you take them separately, their legacies are incredible. But the fact that they are the only married couple to hold every category and class of aviation FAA rating in the United States is incredible on their own. They have been recognized by past presidents for their contributions to aviation. They've started a business, they failed the business, and they started another one, and they have basically made aviation ground school fun for others to learn and to be interested in. They started back in the early 80s through VHSs in a small studio, and now their brand has literally grown globally. So they do videos, and they are able to send those videos out. While we were there interviewing them, they did an interview for one of their past clients from Saudi Arabia, a prince in Saudi Arabia. And it was incredible to watch how compassionate they are and how they invest in others and how they take the time for others to help them learn and have fun with aviation. I loved hearing stories about John and Martha flying because the interaction between husband and wife, if you're a married person, you know that it's challenging in terms of just living day-to-day life. And then you take that and put that in a compressed environment and flying and the stresses that you face. And listening to how their interactions are when they fly, particularly one story of them, and they were actually involved in an airplane crash, and the dialogue they had back and forth between John and Martha, it kind of transcended just being married, but it was actually for the safety of the crew. Fortunately, they survived. They're all good. There was some injuries to Martha, but it was an incredible story. And then how they took those lessons learned from their own crash, and then later reformed FAA airman certification standards. It was just hugely impactful to me. These are folks that are world-renowned and very, very famous, and they feel like parents to me. And I hope that my class has that same feeling. You know, they call themselves a mom and pop operation. They are anything but a mom and pop operation. And to be able to see them interact with Stephanie and I, and then interact with their employees, and the compassion and humility towards other people is rare at best. I would say that they value others more than themselves, and they have put other people, their employees, their clients, way in ahead of their bottom line or their business or anything to do there. And that's why I think they're so successful, is people gravitate towards that. They gravitate towards the humility, they gravitate towards their compassion, they gravitate towards their kindness. And they genuinely, in interviewing them, they specifically, when they land at a big air show like Oshkosh, they specifically plan 30 minutes to an hour just to be around fans, just to talk to people. That's not a requirement to do, but they take the time out of their day to do that, and it's just incredible to see.
This will be your first flying lesson.
And then later on, we decided that we thought we spotted things that the whole aviation community could do better, and that we not only had the opportunity to do something, we had the obligation to do something about it. And so we realized we had a platform and we could talk to people. Martha's a good talker. And we realized that we could talk to people and make a difference. And so we have taken that burden on and tried to get the aviation community to do a better job of identifying and mitigating risks. And we think that many of the things that we talk about when safety is a very much misused word and abused word, and we don't think it's a lot of the things that people said to us about safety when we were starting to fly, were offensive to us, and we think the community could be more effective in dealing with safety than it is. And So we've worked on that, and as part of the reason we have the aviation certification standards, we used to focus on physical skills, and we felt that if people had the skills, they were a pilot. Well, skills aren't what cause the accidents. It's risk management that causes the accidents. And now as a community, the airman certification, we changed from practical test standards, which focused on skills. Now we have airman certification standards, which include require a student to be able to identify and mitigate risks. And we've never before in the aviation community, never before asked the person to be able to demonstrate the ability to manage risks. So we're doing that now. And we also require knowledge. To do a good job of managing risk, you need knowledge. So we have standards for knowledge, and then we still have the physical skills standards. So Martha and I have decided to make a difference in the aviation community, and it's what impressed us was seeing people get killed.
One of the things about the vocabulary that John is referring to that bothered us a lot, that we talk about when we give safety talks at AirVenture and Oshkosh and Sun and Fun and other places, is the absoluteness of the way non-pilots particularly talk about safety. And in years past, after a major airline accident, previous secretaries of transportation, FAA administrators have been known to use language like there can be no compromise with safety, or safety is our #1 priority. And the problem with that is, in those kind of absolute terms, it's not true, and it can't be true, because anytime you're operating any kind of motorized vehicle, airplanes, boats, trucks, tanks, whatever, there is a certain amount of risk that you're accepting. Just by moving that vehicle, you're accepting a certain amount of risk.
There's an ancient saying. Saying is, a ship is safest in the harbor, but that's not what they're for. In the same way with an airplane, you cannot move an airplane from this position to this position without some degree of risk, because moving an aircraft, you can't start an engine without risk. For someone to stand up and say there can be no compromise with safety, it isn't and can't be true. And
tell them what Robert Sumwalt said to you.
Well, we just had a meeting with the former chair of the National Aviation Safety Board. And I asked him, what is safety? And he says, safety is the identification and mitigation of risk down to the point where you're comfortable with it.
Where it's acceptable.
And because it's not the absence of risk. And people say, we're talking about all of these accidents we've had recently, and people come nuts all the time and nail us. Is aviation safe? And it really depends on what you think of safety. But there are risks associated with aviation. There are risks associated with anything you do in life. And certainly there are risks associated with getting in the air. And we think that we need to have straight talk about aviation safety. And so to say platitudinous things distracts us from the idea of actually working on risks and identifying.
Of having a thoughtful conversation. Right. And of course, the definition of acceptable risk is situation dependent. What is acceptable risk for the commercial airline business is going to be probably way too low for operational Air Force units. Certainly for combat units. The missions are different, and that makes the acceptable level of safety different by necessity. But it needs thoughtful discussion in each area, every area, about what is the acceptable level of risk for this kind of operation.
People have been fond of saying in the past there can only be one level of safety. You can't have different levels of safety for different aircraft. Well, you can't afford the same levels of safety for for a Cub that you could for a 747. It can't carry the weight of the equipment required to have the same safety as a 747. It's not practical. So you just can't have one level of safety. Safety is dependent on the situation, and it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But what we think that straight talk about safety means that you deal with reality. You don't say platitudinous things like there can be no compromise with safety. You can't move a vehicle without compromise with safety.
Safety can certainly be and should be a core value, but if it's the number one priority, you're not going to get anything done.
Yeah, you're just going to keep it in the hangar.
Speaking of safety, you all have had your own accident. Can you retell the story for our classmates?
Our own accident?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's a low IQ accident. We were flying around in one of these ground school courses, and we were in a single engine airplane, a Cessna 210. It was a turbocharged 210, so we were able to fly a little higher. We were going at 11,500 feet, and we'd look over there, and the battery's not charging. And we said, well, you know, we really ought to land and get the generator fixed. But we're late. We're going to arrive after dark, and we got to set up the classroom. And so well, I'll tell you what, we're pretty good at holding a heading. Let's just keep track of the time and get our position and hold a heading and dead reckon until we think we're within the vicinity of where we're going to be, and then we'll let ourselves down through the clouds and
Turn on the radio, call up ATC,
right,
get an approach,
and turn on the battery and so we did that. We dead reckoned where we thought we were there. So okay, let's now turn on the battery. We turned on the battery, and what did we get? Absolutely nothing. The battery was stone cold dead. So we had no radio, we had no navigation. We're above the layer of clouds.
no recent weather.
Yeah, no recent weather information. We had no idea what was going on. So we let ourselves down and continue down until we think we're 100 feet above the ground and never see the ground. Holy mackerel, let's get out of here. And so we put the power in, climb up. And on the way down, by the way, we picked up a load of ice. And on the way back up, we pick up our second load of ice. And we're on top. And now I am scared to death. I am just absolutely terrified. And Martha says to me, well, John, we need to go back down again. And I said to Martha, I don't want to go back down again. You know, we're going to pick up another load of ice. And so we have this conversation back and forth. And while we're arguing with each other, the sun slowly goes below the horizon. And Martha says to me, well, John, would you rather do it now or would you rather do it in the dark? I hate the way she thinks. And I said, okay, we'll go down now. So we start down now and pick up our third load of ice. And once again, we continue until we think we're about 100 feet above the ground. We don't know what the altimeter setting is, and we don't know where we are. So we don't know the height of the terrain. So we keep on going down, and all of a sudden I see a road. And I said, that's it, I'm going to land on that road. And Martha says to me, no, John, you can't land on that road. I said, why can't I land on that road? She says, there's power lines there. So I don't see the power lines. But I said, I'm going to go and land over in this field. So I went over and there was a big cornfield in front of me, and I just pulled the power off and flared. It was just about the instant I pulled the power off, the wheels are on the ground, and the wheels hit a rut, and the airplane goes up on its nose, and then it goes over in the left wing and settles back down again. And Martha says to me, John, I'm okay. I'm okay. She says, I hit my nose on the panel. I have a bloody nose, but I'm okay. And I look up and I see a big hole in the windshield. And I said, the hell you hit your nose on the panel? Your head went through the windshield. She said, no. I just hit my nose on the panel. I'm okay. And so I felt the back of her back, and it was all blood all the way down her back. I, well, you got something more than just a bloody nose. So I decided I'm going to get out and go around and see her. And so I get out of the airplane and I go around in front, and in front of the airplane, there's this big long string of tracks and wrenches, tools, rags, all strung out in front of the airplane. And I said to myself, well, I'll be damned. Someone crashed here before we did. And what had happened is we had a toolbox in the back of the airplane, and the toolbox had come forward, beat Martha about the head and shoulders, and gone out the front of the airplane. And so I got around to the right-hand side, and I opened the door, and there was blood all over the panel, just sprayed everywhere. And I said to myself, "You idiot, you absolute idiot. How dare you take such a risk with something so precious all over just didn't want to land and get a battery fixed or the generator fixed." And I realized how incredibly dumb and allegedly bright person can be. And I thought, that is the stupidest thing we have ever done. And so we got Martha out of it, and somebody saw the airplane up on its nose, and they took us to the hospital. And
They didn't think the plane on the nose like that was a normal position.
And so they took us to the hospital, and they shaved Martha's head and sewed up her head. And the next day she taught her class, and had the lieutenant governor
of the state of
in the
South
class.
Dakota in the class.
So that's one of the things about flying, is you get to teach really very special people, because that's who flies. And so what we learned out of that is that there was a failure in risk management. We obviously should have taken steps to.
What we really learned is that people who think they are bright, allegedly bright people, can sometimes do some really stupid things.
Yeah, and we were thinking we were bright, but it may have been a mistake, because it was a stupid thing to do. But she worked out to be okay and taught the class, and got a lot of attention with the shaved head. But so that's it. We learned how vulnerable we are.
So how did the King schools pivot after that and teach more risk management?
Well, we're slow learners, but we gradually picked up on the idea that this can be a risky activity, and we need to figure out what the risks are and mitigate them and so on. So that was obviously part of the development of our risk management philosophy.
It made us look back, if you will, and think about why was it that people's attempts when we were new young pilots to straighten us out, to tell us we shouldn't be doing something, why did they rub us the wrong way and not produce the result that the people talking to us were trying to get, which was basically to rethink what we were doing. We were flying that Cherokee 140 that we had bought to learn to fly all around the country, including, we were instrument rated by then, but instrument rating in a Cherokee 140 doesn't say much in terms of the ability to handle weather and terrain and stuff like that. And so part of what we came up with was that the vocabulary they used with us wasn't acceptable to us, and probably wasn't acceptable to a lot of other people. And maybe we should change that, or try to change it in the community. Vocabulary like, you don't know how to make a good aviation decision. Okay, so what exactly does that mean? What does that teach me? What guidance does that give me? Basically just calls me a bad person without giving me an avenue to improve. And so we try and approach, when we give talks, people with the idea that what we're trying to do is give them tools. Just like if you scuba dive, you have tools and standard procedures you go by. If you go rock climbing, if you go horseback riding, all kinds of different things, there are tools, mental tools that you use to help manage the risk, which those industries were talking about, those activities, and aviation was not putting it that way. In aviation at that time, the big feeling was, if you say anything about it being risky or dangerous, you're going to scare away all the people that might want to learn to fly. So just tell people it's perfectly safe.
We used to have a talk we called the big lie. And the big lie was, people would say, well, the most dangerous part of my trip was the drive to the airport. Well, statistically, you can just show that's not true.
It's true for commercial airlines, no question, but not for general aviation.
And you can look at the number of miles and the number of accidents per mile and all of that. And you can just show that it's not true that the most dangerous part of the trip was the drive to the airport. And so we think, first of all, we have to be truthful, and we have to back up what we say with facts. We were a young couple on the way. We resented people telling us we didn't have any judgment, even though we didn't. But we didn't like to be told that. And when someone says you don't have any judgment, well, what's the guidance? What do I do to remedy that? And so you give them tools that they can use to make better risk management decisions. And you don't have to tell them they're stupid. They'll figure that out later on.
We had a good friend who was learning to fly. This was after we had gotten into the risk management and had our own attitude adjustment. And she got right up, like first lesson or so past solo, and dropped out. And we asked her, how come you're quitting flying? You were really enthusiastic about it. And what she said was really enlightening to us. What she said was, I scuba dive, I do extreme skiing. I know when there are risks in an activity and it doesn't bother me. I want to learn how to manage those risks. All my instructor is doing is telling me this is safe, don't worry. And he's not teaching me to manage the risks that I know must be there, but he's not really teaching me about them and what to do if something goes wrong. And so I'm out of here, she says. I'm not going to participate in something where they essentially lie to me and tell me that it's perfectly safe when I know it absolutely cannot be.
So our philosophy about it is, if you want someone to change their behavior, you got to talk to them in terms that are acceptable to them, because if they're rejecting everything you're saying, it's not going to happen. And so as an aviation community, we need to learn how to make these terms acceptable to people.
We're going to round out with one more question for up here on stage, and then allow the audience members to ask their own questions. Throughout your career, you guys have been thoroughly storied in all your accomplishments. You have been recognized at the national and international levels. You have countless awards. I've seen your website, it's like this long, of just awards.
You got to remember, that's our website. We put that stuff on.
Not on Suga. You guys are known by face, by voice all around the world. You went after the FAA and told them they were doing it wrong and won. What is it that you're most proud of throughout your career?
I'm very happy to be alive. That's.
I think probably the thing we're most proud of is John's work on the Airman certification standards and the FAA agreeing that they needed to, on the instrument knowledge test, they don't do this, they got rid of this question finally, but a sample of the kind of thing that made us angry about why the tests were not working to keep pilots alive, is they were asking instrument rating applicants on the written test, how many satellites are there in the GPS constellation? You know what the answer is? Who cares? Because your equipment will tell you if you have enough or if you don't have enough, and whether that's 20, 25, 30, 50, who cares? As long as you have enough.
How does that help you do a better job of risk management?
How does it help you as an instrument pilot stay alive when you're shooting an approach to minimums and to figure out what you should be looking for and how low you can go when you see this or you see that and so on? It wasn't relevant to practical flying.
And that's why the Airman certification standards now have knowledge standards.
Which they never used to have. They always had standards for the practical, skills. You have to be within so many degrees on your heading, so many feet on your altitude, and so on, so much airspeed. But they didn't have any standard for what they were allowed to put on the knowledge tests for judging whether you were going to be a competent airman. It was basically a contest to see which test writer could dig out the most obscure detail to see if you had read every single page of every single manual that they gave you. You can see that got us a little incensed. But so we're very proud of that because the FAA started the change as kind of, well, I guess we have to, but they've really bought into it on that, and they're staying with it, which doesn't always happen with a bureaucracy. So we think it's saving lives, and that's a real honor to feel that you had a part in doing something that saved lives.
And through the years, we've had people we've cared about who took off in circumstances they shouldn't have taken off in, and we just feel like they get killed, and you feel like grabbing them by the lapel, and they're not available to do that.
So at this time, we'd like to open the floor to any questions you all may have. Please use the microphones.
All right, Major Rob Curry, United States Air Force. John, Martha, thank you for everything you've done in aviation. Martha, your face is kind of ingrained in my head for over 25 years. I was watching your flight computer video on the E6B flight computer when 9/11 happened, and 2 weeks later, I enlisted in the United States Air Force. So you were at the start of my Air Force journey, so I appreciate it.
I'm so sorry.
Well, my question has to do with just that. 25 years ago is when I started learning how to fly. I remember my flight instructor, he bought his first airplane for $12,000 is what he told me. And he said, if I worked hard, someday I could have my own. And that was double his annual income at the time back in the early 70s. Now a new aircraft costs $500,000. And John, you said flight instruction costs $8 an hour, and now it's nearing almost $200 an hour. Do you think we are at risk of losing the next generation of aviators? And if that is a risk, how do we mitigate it?
Are we at risk of that?
I didn't hear clearly.
Hey, let me repeat the question as I understand it, and then you can come back and tell me how wrong I am. I think what he said is, are we at risk of losing a generation of pilots due to the expenses? And are we at risk? Yes, we're at risk of that. There's a risk, and we have to identify that as a risk and try and mitigate that risk. But yeah, that's a risk. I think, my goodness, a new Cessna 172 single engine basic airplane is like $700,000. So is there the risk of that not being practical? Yeah, there's a risk of that.
One of the best recommendations that we can make to anyone who's flying civilian is to join organizations, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, AOPA in particular, also EAA, Experimental Aircraft Association. They are very strong and powerful voices for general aviation at all levels, including, especially from AOPA, work on trying to hold down the fees, landing fees, parking fees, and so on at airports where for smaller aircraft. And if it wasn't for AOPA and other aviation organizations in the US similar to them, we wouldn't have general aviation now as we know it, because we've done some flying around the world in Australia, a little bit in Europe, and the regulations and the approach to making regulations for civilian aviation are so totally different. If the government feels like doing something, they just do something. There's no consultation about, you know, what happens if we make this airspace change or this new regulation. There's no input from the affected community like there is here in the US. And the more people that belong to organizations like AOPA and the stronger our voice is, the louder we'll be heard in Congress and directly at the FAA to help control those costs as best as we can. But yes, the cost is a definite issue. It always has been for a lot of people, but it's worse.
It was at $8 an hour for me. And another organization, National Business Aviation Association.
Yes.
Good morning, ma'am, sir. Major Will Calkins, United States Air Force. 50 years of instruction spans many generations of instructing students. We also are going to be instructors teaching CGOs and other airmen. How have you changed your instructions through the generations over 50 years to keep current with, you know, the Gen Zers, the boomers, and et cetera? Thank you.
Well, we're continuously changing. We have over 100 courses. They're they're recorded on video, and we are editing those courses every single day. So it's a continuous process. It's a continuous process working on our brains also. And so we're trying to learn. It's obviously not a static world. The world isn't the same as it used to be. We just went back to our college, and buildings we used to enjoy are gone. When we travel around our circuit of cities, a lot of the hotels we taught ground schools in have been torn down because they're too old to be safe. So everything's changing, and it's just a fact of life, and we have to continually work at it.
A lot of our focus on our courses as we develop them and renew them are on the changes in technology, how you get weather, how you use a tablet in the cockpit, and manage the risk of it, because it can be risky as a distraction as well as providing a great deal of information. And one of the stories we're trying to tell is that tablets can actually cause fatal accidents. We know of a couple of instances where student pilots on solos have had the iPad that they had on a knee board or with a knee strap in their lap come loose on a short final, and the pilot gets distracted trying to get it off the floor and loses control of the airplane, and it crashes.
We have some friends that run a flight school, and one of their students had the knee board fall off on the floor, and he's reached down and couldn't reach it, so he unbuckled his seatbelt and then leaned forward, and the airplane dove into the ground, and of course he got killed permanently. And what a tragedy for everybody involved. So one day Martha and I are taxiing in, and she's let me be in the left seat for once, and I'm in the left seat, and she's my co-pilot, and we're taxiing, and I said, well, when we get in, I want to pick up my iPad off the floor. And she says, I didn't realize you dropped it. And I says, I didn't intend for you to know I dropped it. So, and the idea was just keep on going and control the airplane until we got in. And that of course is obviously the answer, but it's hard to make yourself not to leave it on the floor down there. All right, I took us off to the side, excuse me. Okay. Good morning. I think a microphone is coming to you.
Grab the microphone over.
Good morning. I'm Major Richardson, U.S. Air Force. One of the challenges I've encountered flying is teaching other people how to be flight instructors. Nobody told me that was going to be difficult. What is your approach? How do you teach people how to be effective and better instructors teaching other people how to teach?
Well, I think the number one thing is to care. And we have right now a crisis in flight instructors. Designated examiners tell us that the quality of the flight instructor applicants is not as good as it used to be, because in general, they're hurrying to get to the airlines, and trying to build flight time, and they aren't as they don't care about the flight instructor job as much as they used to, and
they don't care about the learning that they go through. So the DPEs see this issue at both the flight instructor applicant level and also that flight instructors, students that are coming through applying for tests. They're focused basically on learning the minimum as fast as they can in order to get the time they need to go to the airlines, because a lot of the flight schools that they'll be going to have pathways to different airlines. So they're confident, maybe a little less so in the last few months, but confident that they're going to be going right into an airline job. So why do I need to know all this other stuff? And it's dangerous for the community because they don't teach the kinds of things that
they don't
they
put
ought
the
to
effort
be.
into it.
They don't. This isn't all of them, clearly. I mean, this is a pretty broad brush thing, but a lot of them are just on their way and to the airlines and don't care. And they produce student applicants. I sat in on a DPE monthly meeting in San Diego, and they'll produce instrument applicants that when asked, you're flying IFR on a flight plan, you know, got your clearance and so on, and you lose communications, what are you going to do? And the regulation lays out very specific things about what altitude, what route, and so on you're going to fly and how you do the approach. And the instrument rating applicant will say, well, I'll exercise my PIC authority and I'll just do whatever I think I should.
I'll declare an emergency.
Right.
Well, the problem is you don't have communications. How are you going to declare an emergency? But so the applicants don't have the depth that they used to have. And as we said, the number one thing is for people to care and put
I
effort
think
into it.
the number two thing is, and it goes along with caring, is the issue of empathy and trying to think like the student thinks, to explain it in a way that makes sense to them, because not all of us learn the same way. And just from teaching where we have both video and textual courses, and sometimes they're combined into one and sometimes they're just totally separate depending on the course. We get feedback about people who say, well, I'm just, you know, I love the videos, but I just don't get anything out of the text, or the videos take too long. I really prefer just the text that I can scan. And so people learn differently. And so it's important for an instructor to figure out how each student is going to learn and how to help them pace themselves and understand when working with a student that everybody's going to plateau. They're going to plateau in different places for different lengths of time, but everybody's going to plateau. And everybody's got to have patience about it, for the student and the instructor. And sometimes just having them fly with a different instructor who explains a particular point differently will make the difference in getting out of that.
I think we have time for one more quick question, about 5 minutes left. We have one. Yep.
We've been kicked out of some real nice places.
Well, good morning, Major Watson, United States Air Force. As you were talking, I'm very grateful for a lot of the ideas that you brought up, especially like the barriers to entry, about how much things have cost. And one of the things that sparked in the last hour was I just bought my son a $50 drone that cost about 8 cents an hour to operate. Right now in Ukraine, there's more drone flight hours than there is manned fixed wing and rotary flight hours. And especially as technology starts to evolve and people become more digitalized, with class 1 to class 5 RPAs, anywhere from a quadcopter to an $800 million B-21 that's potentially going to be unmanned, how do you see unmanned operations and unmanned training kind of taking into the air-mindedness and like flying operations of the future?
Well, if I understand the question properly, it says, what do we think the effect of unmanned operations is going to have on aviation? Did I get it right? Okay. And what an amazing thing that system. Martha and I are both helicopter pilots, and that so simplifies vertical flight. And the Helicopter Association International became Vertical Aviation International, and because they recognize that the world is constantly changing, and this is a big change. And this application of basically a computer and rotors has changed everything. And we have no idea what the future is. 10 years ago, we never heard of drones, these kind of homemade drones or small drones. And now they're all over the place, and they give us beautiful photos. We have a drone course, and we sell a lot of drone courses to the Border Patrol, and that lets them much more safely and much more economically patrol the border. So it's an incredible future. Didn't see it coming. Don't know where it's going.
I think that there are a lot of uses, particularly with police forces and using small drones to reconnoiter and figure out before they actually get out of vehicles at a call what's going on and where the people are and how many guns are visible and so on. There's a lot of value there. I think it's going to be a while before most people are going to be comfortable getting into an unmanned vehicle to fly city to city. And that's not going to be a matter. The regulations may come much earlier than the public acceptance.
And a lot of money is being spent where there's still a lot of problems to be solved in terms of urban air mobility. There's a lot of problems to be solved before it becomes practical.
But the interesting thing is how fast things can move, and they're moving a lot faster than they used to. But the Wright brothers' first flight, and you know it was in 1903, and you know how primitive is the only way to express it really, that aircraft was, and how short the duration of the flight and how low altitude. And in 1927, 24 years later, Charles Lindbergh flew the North Atlantic solo from New York to Paris. Now, that amount of technological change is probably in the unmanned airspace area going to be condensed into 10 or 15 years max. But again, public acceptance is an issue, not just the technology.
John and Martha, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you up here on stage.
I had promised myself I was going to talk about you folks before we got going, and I forgot to do it because we were carried away with ourselves. But you have asked brilliant questions, put great effort into this, and it's one of the greatest pleasures in life is to be around competent people. And you two are enormously competent, and it's been great.
I don't think so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.